The second most important metric to look at when you're building a scalable business is lifetime value of a customer. Let me break this down to you, right? So essentially the lifetime value of a customer, what essentially means is like how much can you expect to make from a customer over their lifetime with your company? There's different ways to calculate this and which we're going to break down in this specific video, right? Now, the amateur thing that a lot of businesses and brands do is they look at ROAS as when they're evaluating the company's success, right? That's an amateur thing to do because ROAS is very short-sighted, right? It has its importance, but when you're looking at the grand scheme of the company, like talking about the company's growth and the company value, you cannot look at the ROAS. ROAS is a good metric to look at when you're optimizing on a daily basis and weekly, monthly basis on a specific platform level. So again, when you're looking at scaling your company and looking at the value of how successful your company is or can be, you have to look at the lifetime value, right? And simply to calculate the lifetime value of a customer is you can look at this in a 12-month time frame. You can look at this in a 6 month time frame, or you can look at this from the entirety of your company's existence, right? So simply what you have to do is take the total number of revenue that you've made, and we'll use a 1 year. Take the total number of revenue, divide that by the total number of customers during that 1 year, and that will give you the lifetime value. Now, the issue with this calculation is it doesn't always consider new customers that you've acquired on that specific month. And so typically the best way to break this down is do it on a cohort basis. So I'll look at Q1. How much revenue did we generate in Q1 and how much customers did we generate in Q1, right? So that will give you your lifetime value, and you can track this on a quarter to quarter basis, right? So in Q1, boom, you look at this customer cohort. How much new customers did we generate, right? And then you can track that in Q2. Boom. From those same customers, how much revenue did we generate from those customers? You can track that in Q3 and all the way in Q4. And so when you look at that entire year, you can see exactly how much revenue those new customers that you acquired in Q1 generated for you in Q4. Now, that's the best way to be able to calculate your customer lifetime value. Now, let me give you a few scenarios, right? So say, for example, you're a supplement company, right? And on a monthly basis, you spend $100,000 in marketing, right? And so I'm going to share some example of the good things and the bad things, what typically businesses will do. So if a company is spending $100,000 a month on marketing, and then when after the end of the month, they look at the revenue from the platform and they've generated $100,000. So you're essentially just breaking even from the platform level. But some companies, they will also obviously, you need to do this, is you have to subtract the cost of goods sold, and you also have to subtract the shipping cost, right? And so when you do the math, you're not making money on the front end, right? So just as an example, so I'm gonna pull up my calculator and then we'll do the math. So $100,000, right? And so let's say, for example, that your cost of goods sold is like $30,000, right? So you subtract $100,000 from $30,000, and so you're at $70,000, right? Now the other cost that you have to take into account is the shipping, right? So it costs you $10,000 to ship all those products to those customers that specific month. So that's another $10,000 subtracted right there. So you have $60,000, right? And this doesn't even include the cost of acquisition, right? So again, the cost of acquisition on the first one is going to be pretty high. So let's say, for example, we'll subtract $50,000 for the cost of acquisition to acquire all those customers. So that's going to leave you only with $10,000, right? If you're even lucky, because like the cost of acquisition can be even higher. In most end, a lot of brands, a lot of companies, they lose money on the front end. And so when you start to analyze the data for this specific example that I just gave, the first month, you're only making $10,000 in profit, essentially, from the initial $100,000 that you spent. As I mentioned, some companies don't even make $10,000. They lose that. And so when they start to evaluate the marketing, like this is too expensive, so they stop marketing. Now, here's the piece of the puzzle, or here's the piece of the lens that they don't necessarily see, right? Because when you look at the customers that you acquired on that first quarter, as I mentioned before, those customers will purchase from you. Again, depending on what your product is and the business, they will purchase from you at least 6 times that specific year. So that means that from that customer that you acquired that first, in the Q1, you can make 6x what you initially made from them in Q1. I'm hoping that makes sense. And so when you then track and you look at things from this bigger picture, you're making at least like a 4 or 6x LTV to CAC from the initial acquisition of your customer. I'm hoping this makes sense. So I want to give you another example over here. So say for example, you sell a pair of shoes, right, for $100. So you have a pair of shoes that you sell for $100, right? And then you need to essentially subtract, it costs you $20 to make that pair of shoes, right? And we're gonna do this on an individual basis. So I'm gonna subtract 100 from 20, boom. So it leaves you with 80. So $80 is your gross profit. Again, that doesn't include your cost per acquisition, right? Now, let's say that your cost per acquisition is, I wanna say $60, right? So we'll minus 60 from that. Boom. And so you're going to be essentially at like -20. Now, here's the thing though, that customer, right, is going to purchase from you on average of, let's say, 3 times in their lifetime, right? So now what you have to do is you have to subtract the 80, right, times 3. So that leaves you at 240, right? And so again, when you subtracted the cost per acquisition, which was $60, right? So when you do the math now, so like how many times like 60 goes into 240? So that's a 4, right? So then your CAC to LTV is going to be a 4x. Right? So you're essentially making a 4x from this specific example that I just gave you over there. So like, again, a lot of brands don't make the mistake of not analyzing this data. And so they lose so much money from customers because they stop too short when marketing the products and when marketing their company.